Good morning, welcome, bienvenue. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you might happen to be. Welcome to Lips and Riffs Combating Racism and Discrimination. What is our role and what are our boundaries? My name is Rodel Imbarlina-Ramos and I lead Peel Newcomer Strategy Group, the LIP immediately west of Toronto. And I'm happy to serve as your moderator for this plenary session today. Without a doubt, we've all gone through significant change since March. So let me begin by acknowledging that as a fellow LIP, there's a tremendous amount of resilience in this virtual room. And although we cannot see each other in person, we do come together today to learn, to share ideas, to support, to empathize with LIP and RIF colleagues from across the country. We're a unique group of community planners and coordinators working to create welcoming communities, even if we're suddenly faced with new and daunting circumstances. At this point, we deserve to take a moment not just to discuss specific aspects of our work, which we'll undoubtedly do throughout the course of the day today, but to take a step back and celebrate our individual and collective resilience. So, from me to all of you, a virtual handshake, a fist bump, a well-deserved pat on the back. We're all responding to the unique characteristics of our respective communities and regions. And so in my own region, our community COVID coordination table tracked the disproportionality of infections among racialized members of our region, which includes many newcomers and immigrants. And this gave rise to new tables, an equity table. And then soon thereafter, George Floyd died. And the month after that, local police in my region shot and killed a Pakistani man as they responded to a mental health emergency. This gave immediate rise to a new anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination collaborative comprised of many of my partnership council members, and many of them advocated for the defunding of police. Obviously, as a LIP, we want to go with our community at their pace and where they want to go. But this left me asking, what was our role as a LIP in all of this? What are our boundaries in this new situation? Regardless of the answer, we're continually asking, what's the best way to approach and engage anti-racism and anti-discrimination work as the nature and even the language of this work is changing? How are LIPs and RIFs making these choices, and what influences these decisions? Finally, what are the expectations from our funder, IRCC, in this respect? To answer these questions, we have on our panel today, Yves Saint-Germain, Director of Language and Francophone Policy, Settlement and Integration Policy at IRCC, Olivia Bornik, Manager of the North Shore Immigrant Inclusion Partnership in North Vancouver to provide a not-for-profit based LIP perspective, and Vera Dodic, Manager of the Toronto Newcomer Office at the City of Toronto to provide a municipal government-based LIP perspective. We will hear from each of our three panelists who will speak for about 7 to 10 minutes each. We will then ask a prepared question to the panel before opening the floor to all of you for your questions. If you have a question to ask, as Jean mentioned it at the intro, please use Slido and be sure to upvote questions that others have posed that you would like to have addressed. We will address audience questions after all panelists have presented. You may ask a question in the official language of your choice, and the Slido code again for our conference is #P2P2020. Apologize in advance if we don't get to all of your questions. And lastly, please note that this panel is not an opportunity to ask IRCC about the appropriateness of specific LIP tactics, but to discuss issues, questions, and strategies facing LIPs and RIFs in responding to this important societal flashpoint, in the hopes that these provide new perspectives on your work. So with that, let's get underway. I'd like to turn the table to Yves, who will give us an IRCC perspective. He has his own slides and content to share with all of you.
Thank you so much, Rodel, and it's a pleasure to be with Vera and Olivia and yourself today to speak about IRCC directions vis-a-vis LIPs and RIF. So I'm going to share my screen. So it's a real pleasure. So bonjour à tous et toutes. So thanks so much for the invitation. Dans ma présentation aujourd'hui, so we want to discuss, as Rodel explained, LIPS and RIF, combating racism and discrimination. So what are we doing in this space, and what are our boundaries? So I will be speaking about the evolution of RIF and LIPS. I'll be speaking about the activities they're doing in terms of awareness, donc les activités de sensibilisation qu'elles mènent dans le but de promouvoir la diversité et de lutter contre le racisme. L'importance de votre travail en ces temps de pandémie. Et finalement, je soulignerai le rôle d'appui que jouent les RIF et les LIPS dans la mise en œuvre des priorités d'IRCC. Donc, je pense que ce qui est important de constater, so currently, as you can see in terms of evolution of RIF and the LIPS, currently RICC provides funding to a network of 81 LIPS and 13 RIFs across the country. The work that you do is vital to the Salmon Program objective for regional and local planning around the integration of newcomers and refugees, and for fostering welcoming communities. Your networks bring together Salmon agencies, municipalities, and other organizations such as school boards, health networks, and the private sector. Through your work, Salmon and non-Salmon services are made more accessible, coordinated, and adapted to the needs of newcomers at the local level. The LIPS and the RIF promote Canada's two-way integration model, which highlights the role of both newcomers and society in contributing to successful integration. Earlier this week, I think you had a chance to hear Honorable Minister Mendicino speak about the government's immigration priorities and challenges. The minister underscored the contribution of LIPS and RIF to actively promote diversity and welcome newcomers to their communities, and increasingly, as the department introduced initiatives to attract more newcomers to smaller cities and rural regions across Canada. Depuis la création des premiers RIFs en 2003 et des premiers plis LIPS en 2008, le rôle a grandement évolué. Prenons les RIFs par exemple, qui arrivaient au départ plutôt avec une mission de mobilisation des intervenants et de promotion de la collaboration en matière d'immigration francophone. Au-delà de ce objectif, les RIFs sont de plus en plus sollicités dans la planification des services, par exemple, à travers la consolidation d'un parcours d'intégration francophone, mais aussi au niveau des activités de sensibilisation. La sensibilisation auprès des membres de leur réseau, des collectivités d'accueil et des autres intervenants du milieu au niveau local, régional et provincial au sujet des besoins des nouveaux arrivants d'expression française. Nous assistons donc à un renforcement du rôle des RIFs qui sont sollicités sur plusieurs fronts. International Call for Proposal 2019. We also work towards a modernization of the RIF activities and through a logic model. So as you may recall, the National Call for Proposal that RICC launched in 2019 for indirect services reflected the evolution of LIPS from new changes to manage the growth of the LIPS network by introducing new eligible activities. So what are these eligible activities? So criteria for the creation of new LIPS. So applicants now have to provide evidence of multi-sector support, municipal support, engagement, include stats on the size of the newcomer population in their catchment area. We also introduced zonal immigration partnerships known as ZIPs, a LIP for small centers or for centers that have few immigrant serving agencies. We also introduced feasibility studies for communities unable to meet the criteria to create a new LIP or a ZIP. So this short-term research funding determines whether a LIP or a ZIP would be possible and would thrive. Currently, there are 7 ongoing feasibility studies. Avec le financement des initiatives du plan d'action pour les langues officielles 2018-2023, des changements ont été apportés aux modalités du programme d'établissement pour les services indirects, pour permettre aux RIF finalement de faire la promotion de leur communauté, dans un contexte où nous avons des objectifs en immigration francophone à atteindre, dont la consolidation du parcours d'intégration francophone. Les nouvelles activités admissibles incluent, par exemple, des activités de promotion, des services d'établissement francophones et des communautés francophones en situation minoritaire, mais aussi des activités de sensibilisation, d'attraction et de rétention en soutien à la vitalité des communautés francophones en situation minoritaire. Nous sommes aussi en période de réflexion au niveau des outils de gouvernance des RIFs, avec la création récente d'un groupe de travail RIF et FCFA-IRCC qui se penchera sur la modernisation du modèle logique qui date de 2013 afin de mieux refléter votre travail actuel et l'évolution de votre rôle. So, as you can see, LIPS and RIF do have activities that promote diversity and combat racism. So turning to this conference theme of racism and discrimination free in Canada, LIPS and RIF have made notable achievements in the areas of local relevant research, information sharing, partnership building, and strategic planning. You've also been working to raise awareness in communities across Canada about the importance of diversity, including highlighting the significant contribution of newcomers. Some of these public awareness campaigns reach beyond the newcomer audience and speak to communities about how they could combat racism, anti-immigrant sentiment. But be it through major public campaigns, such as the Welcoming Weeks and Newcomer Days, or through community celebrations, picnics, barbecues, LIPS and RIF have found ways to make engagement with newcomers and around newcomers' issue meaningful. LIPS and RIF have always played a key role in responding to emerging challenges, and today Canada, like many other countries, facing a dual challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic and calls for a more socially just society. The latest speech from the throne outlines a number of anti-racism measures that the government of Canada is committed to, recognizing that more needs to be done to eliminate racism and discrimination. Minister Mendicino spoke about the importance of working together to collectively address longstanding inequalities and racism in our society. Many of the initiatives are taking place, such as projects funded through Canada's anti-racism strategy, which is a $45 million investment to take immediate steps in combating racism and discrimination. La Semaine nationale de l'immigration francophone, qui a lieu la première semaine de novembre sous la thématique Ma couleur francophone, a connu aussi un succès inégalé avec plus de 230 activités. La thématique proposait aux participants de réfléchir à la lutte contre la discrimination raciale. En collaboration avec la Fédération des communautés francophones et acadiennes du Canada, les RIF ont contribué aux efforts de sensibilisation à la diversité en organisant des forums d'échange, des cafés virtuels, des projections de films, suivi de débats et de tables rondes. À travers leurs activités de sensibilisation, des employeurs et ont fourni des appuis au regroupement ethnoculturel. Les RIF sont donc directement impliqués dans la lutte contre le racisme. While LIPS and RIF have been responding to racism and discrimination for years, I recognize the significant work you and your partners have done recently in response to the anti-immigrant sentiment that has been on the rise in some communities due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Le contexte actuel de la pandémie a fait ressurgir les inégalités économiques et sociales au sein de la société canadienne. Nous connaissons une augmentation des agressions et des messages haineux à caractère xénophobe, malheureusement. Le travail de sensibilisation que font les plis et les RIF sur la contribution positive des immigrants à leur communauté est plus importante que jamais. Recently, LIPS and RIF have been focused on responding to COVID-19 on many fronts, including coordinating responses at the local level by bringing key players such as health and education sectors, employers, regional administration to the table. Also highlighting the role that newcomers play on the front lines and identifying newcomers' needs and how COVID-19 is impacting this group. So I know that LIPS and RIF are working with local partners to advance a racially just recovery from COVID-19. There are strong links between the Black Lives Matter movement and supporting diversity and welcoming communities. The Black Lives Matter protests that are taking place across US, Canada, and other countries are situated within a century-old history of violence against Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This is a moment, a time to pause, listen, and amplify these voices. RCC encourage les RIFs et les plis à utiliser leur plateforme pour faire la promotion des communautés plus accueillantes, diversifiées et tolérantes, tout en partageant des informations sur ces mouvements comme Black Lives Matter avec leurs membres, en parlant de l'expérience des nouveaux arrivants racialisés et en promouvant les dialogues communautaires sur l'importance de l'inclusion, en célébrant la diversité à travers des éléments multiculturels. So, as you can see on this, so there's multiple elements taking place. So basically, as you can see, we have broadened the reach of those campaigns. So the department has done much more to reach, for example, Immigration Matters, Municipal Campaign, sharing stories about newcomers in communities, helping, providing diversity training for employers. La participation des RIFs à l'initiative des communautés francophones accueillantes est un autre exemple concret de comment faire le travail à créer des communautés plus inclusives. With increasing immigration levels, the social and economic impact of COVID-19 and the continued need to address racism and discrimination, the pace of change is unlikely to slow. LIPS and RIF will continue to be important conduits of information on local needs and priorities. À travers les réseaux des plis et des RIF, le secrétariat national des plis, la FCFA et des conférences comme celle-ci P2P et les rapports des plis et des RIF, IRCC est à l'écoute pour comprendre ce que vous avez besoin, pour continuer à épauler vos communautés. Ce que nous entendons alimente nos réflexions et nous permet d'adapter nos politiques. So finally, I would say that the National Settlement and Integration Council will be holding a meeting on anti-racism with the objective of better understanding the challenges and community responses to racist incidents, sharing what's working, and exploring opportunities for further collaboration between RCC and the settlement sector. So, le secrétariat fédéral de la lutte contre le racisme sera probablement invité à la rencontre pour présenter les résultats de ces consultations. So, all to say, we're doing a lot in this space, but happy to hear reviews. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Yves, thank you very much for that presentation. And as always, we collectively thank IRCC for its role in resourcing this work, and particularly your points today on locating, how LIPS and RIFs are conducting this work against a wider range of settlement program initiatives. So thank you for that. I'd like to turn the microphone now to Olivia Bornik, manager of the North Shore Immigrant Inclusion Partnership in North Vancouver. She is going to provide a perspective operating the LIP from a not-for-profit organization. So over to you, Olivia.
Great, thanks very much, Rodel. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning, and it's been wonderful to kind of work together with this team, Rodel and Yves and Vera in advance, just thinking about how to frame up this plenary. So as Rodel mentioned, my name is Olivia Bornik. I'm speaking with you today from Vancouver, BC, where I am an uninvited guest on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. And I'm deeply grateful to be here on the West Coast and having the opportunity to live and work on these beautiful lands. So I work for the North Shore Multicultural Society. And I'm the manager, as Rodel mentioned, of the LIP for the North Shore, also known as the North Shore Immigrant Inclusion Partnership, or NSIP. The North Shore Multicultural Society is a multi-service settlement agency that helps over 5,000 newcomers access services each year and engages over 2,000 community residents in a range of different diversity and inclusion and education activities. Founded in the 1990s, NSMS came into being in direct response to racist incidences in the local community. Looking ahead from that time, NSMS self-funded the beginnings of a cross-sectoral partnership, an immigrant inclusion partnership in the early 2000s, long before provincial or federal funding was available at that time for this work. And then in 2014, with almost a decade of work and relationships behind us, the planning table formally became an IRCC-funded LIP as federal oversight for settlement services was reestablished in BC. Since that time, our collaborative work with 35 agencies and service providers through the NCIP table has always contained a strong anti-racism focus and lens. Housed within the structure of a nonprofit organization, I think NCIP has also really benefited from the nimbleness of its host agency to quickly be able to pivot and adapt over the years to meet time-sensitive and emerging community needs. In 2017, NSMS also won a 3-year Social Delivery and Innovation Grant, or an SDI grant, with funding through IRCC to explore how to best address racism and exclusion in our local communities. Through this grant, NCIP has been able to partner and work collaboratively with NSMS's Center for Diversity and Innovation staff in order to co-create and co-design and co-host anti-racism work and projects in our local community. So just to take a little bit of a step back and give some context and framing for the region in which we work and the community in which we're embedded. So the North Shore is a geographically distinct area of Metro Vancouver, accessed by 2 bridges across the Burrard Inlet. So when you're standing in downtown Vancouver, looking north across the water to the mountains, that encapsulates the North Shore region, and that's where we're based. It's home to 3 municipalities, the City of North Vancouver, the District of North Vancouver, as well as the District of West Vancouver. And the North Shore also has a really strong Indigenous presence with members of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations located on those lands. We're a mid-sized community with 2018 stats indicating a population size of just over 192,000 individuals. And the region has seen rapid demographic change and growth in the last 10 to 15 years. It's one of the fastest growing immigrant receiving areas in the Metro Vancouver area, with an immigration growth rate increase of 8.7%. The North Shore's immigrant communities are diverse. There's over 28 languages that are spoken, with the largest language groups other than English being Farsi, Mandarin, Korean, and Tagalog. And according to 2016 census data, more than 1/3 of households on the North Shore regularly or most often speak languages other than English at home. Most immigrants to the North Shore arrive as economic class immigrants, though we do have a number of business class immigrants as well, and a sizable and growing temporary resident population too. So as we've moved forward in our anti-racism work over the last decade and a half, NSMS has always held a deep-seated belief that a focus on understanding and challenging racism and the legacy of colonialism in our work is crucial as we move forward in community engagement and social impact efforts. This orientation has very much always been at the heart of the conversations around fostering immigrant inclusion, service planning and coordination, and building welcoming community capacity and inclusion efforts being led by the NCIP table. At an anti-racism forum that was hosted in September of 2017, we learned that in a local, largely non-racialized settler community, there's a wide range and spectrum of understanding and readiness to engage in anti-racism and racial equity work. Alongside our colleagues at the Center for Diversity and Innovation, housed within NSMS, we responded by applying and testing a multi-pronged approach to our subsequent initiatives. So these included a series of inclusive inquiry community dialogues, and my predecessor, Alison Dudley, actually spoke to these and presented on them this model at the 2017 P2P conference as well. So inclusive inquiry community dialogues, conversations hosted in workplaces with employers, arts-based initiatives and engagement events, storytelling experiences, and different conferences, and most recently, some unconference models, or an unconference model as well. In their own unique ways, these events all had a similar focus on bringing together Indigenous, newcomer, and long-term settler community members to share learning, to increase awareness and nurture relationships and community building efforts. This approach of testing a range of various strategies and measuring traction also allowed us to honor diverse stages of community readiness and offer different entry points for learning and for change. After 3 years of doing some of this work, we did a deep analysis of our successes and failures, and together with our partners and a skilled external evaluator, set out on a new adapted and adjusted direction. So we developed a theory of change to guide the work of the NCIP table moving forward. And we reset the course of our work to look more intentionally at opportunities for centering equity lenses and Indigenous, Black, and racialized experiences and voices in our community work, our community-facing work. And two models that we have started testing and using a lot more in our work has been the model of community design teams, and then also engaging more as advisory council bodies. We've also increased our commitment to reconciliation and have begun to explore as a LIP table what it means to start looking at and interrogating opportunities to take more decolonialized approaches in our initiatives and work in the community. To date, some of the anti-racism activities that we've undertaken include supporting the creation and distribution of an SMS statement against growing racism, hate crimes, and incidents on the North Shore. So distribution and promotion of that to key community stakeholders. Also sharing media releases naming the increasing rates of COVID-related racism. And I think it's important to note that as a nonprofit agency, NSMS has always, so a nonprofit agency and also the sole settlement or immigrant serving agency on the North Shore, NSMS has always taken a strong stand in responding to all local hate crimes by issuing public statements and notifying key community stakeholders of these events. And we've had some interesting conversations in the last year in particular around the positioning of NSMS public statements versus NCIP public statements. And I'll speak to that a little bit more through the Q&A section of this panel. But in addition, one of the more recently identified key goals as a North Shore LIP has been to explore how to best support the North Shore community to scope out and begin to develop a racial equity strategy. So to this end, in the last few months, we've recently embarked on a community research project that has two kind of areas of focus. So one is to explore opportunities to embed anti-racism or racial equity policies and strategies in our local North Shore systems and community structures. And the second part of that is examining current practices and opportunities for gathering disaggregated data and measuring the impacts of systemic racism in our community, particularly as experienced by immigrants. Finally, over the last 6 months or so, we've also working alongside colleagues at the Center for Diversity and Innovation and a community-led design team. We've co-hosted and co-created a virtual town hall held in September, looking at educating and exploring the idea of a racial equity strategy with members of the public across the North Shore. And a number of different storytelling events and community dialogues as well to maintain our focus on bringing together members of Indigenous, immigrant, and longtime settler communities around opportunities for learning and unlearning and reflection and connection around racism. There's no doubt that we're on a steep learning curve, I think, in this work, and Yves alluded to that in his presentation as well. I think in many ways for us, certainly as a North Shore LIP, it feels like we're at the beginning of a journey exploring new pathways for LIPs to engage in the important work of fostering welcoming, inclusive, equitable, and racially just communities. So at this juncture, you know, I think it feels paramount that we continue to explore approaches and strategies for making the critical work around anti-racism and racial equity accessible both to our immediate LIP stakeholders and partners, and also to members of the community at large. And I'm really thrilled to be part of this panel to kind of explore different ideas and strategies and approaches moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. It's nice to see, you know, how you have listed out some of the various tactics and how that your LIP has selected in approaching and combating anti-racism, anti-discrimination, you know, based on the unique characteristics of your particular community. Just wanted to point out to attendees that Slido is still open. We have just started to get a few questions and a few folks who are upvoting. Yves, you may want to take a quick look at the chat and anticipate there are some questions there for IRCC. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But before then, I'd like to invite Vera Dodic from the City of Toronto to talk about the anti-racism work that is happening at her lib. Vera.
Thank you very much, Rodel. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you today and to be part of this important conversation and this plenary. The conversation is very timely and very relevant for LIPS, always, I would say, but especially at times like these. I would like to start my presentation with a video that the City of Toronto recently released, and the Newcomer Office had a leadership role or lead role in producing the video. So if the organizers could play the video now, please.
As a result of COVID-19,
racism against the East Asian community has been on the rise.
People became more afraid of me, more impatient with me.
I had a friend go to a supermarket and someone walked up to them and coughed in their face and laughed.
We are often seen as a perpetual foreigner.
It is the disrespect, the despise.
Anti-East Asian racism
has no place in Toronto.
No place in Toronto.
Silence and inaction help perpetrate racism by allowing the discriminatory action to continue.
And so when it does happen and you're there,
we'll call it out.
Will you be an ally?
Help us make our Toronto
a Toronto for all.
For all.
For all.
For all.
Thank you for playing the video. And as you have seen or can imagine, as in many other places in Canada, unfortunately in Toronto too, the incidence of racism directed at East Asian communities in our city has increased with COVID, and I felt it was appropriate to start with that. I'm now going to share my slides, and I'm going to start from the slide 3 for those of you that have the presentation. I also wanted to mention the video that you have seen is part of a Toronto for All series of campaigns that the city and the Newcomer Office was part of since 2016, and I'll touch more on the campaigns in a couple of slides, but just wanted to mention that each of the campaigns have been developed in partnership with our community agencies, and we have very close relationship with them. And in this particular case, we worked closely with the Chinese-Canadian National Council for Social Justice and a number of other community agencies. So Yves shared about LIPS, about our role and evolution, and Olivia shared about the context in her location, and this slide is about the context in Toronto. Where we work will determine how we approach the work, and because each of our circumstances are different and the context is different. This slide shows information from 2016, from the census of 2016, and according to the census, 51.2% of our residents are foreign born. What's also quite fascinating, I would say, is that another 27.5% of our residents, so close to 80% in total, have a direct connection to immigration. The 27.5% residents have been born in Canada, but have at least one parent that has been foreign born. So 80% of residents have a direct connection to immigration. Another interesting point is that 15% of Torontonians do not have Canadian citizenship. That's very different than the national average, which is 6%. I believe that speaks to the diversity as far as different immigration statuses and also the diverse path that our residents are going through in order to reach that milestone for many immigrants of achieving Canadian citizenship. We also have the largest Indigenous population in Ontario, the largest Black population in Canada, and we also received the largest number of newcomers. Yes? Okay, that may not be word for word. Do you want me to start from this slide? Okay, so the context in which each of the LIPs across Canada works is very different. We are part of the municipality, and that determines also our approach to a large extent, but also the context in Toronto as the largest city in Canada is very different than elsewhere. You see from this slide that 51.2% of our residents have been born outside of Canada. And you don't have this on the slide, but another 27.5% of our residents who have been born in Canada have at least one parent that's been born outside of Canada. This means that some 80% of Canadian residents, of Toronto residents, have a direct connection to immigration. They live it every day and understand it every day. In addition, I also mentioned that some 15% of Torontonians do not have Canadian citizenship. Across Canada, that's 6%. 6% of people that live in Canada don't have Canadian citizenship. Toronto has the largest population of Indigenous people in Ontario, the largest population of Black people in Canada, and we also received the largest number of newcomers in Canada, some 80,000. And this doesn't include international students, refugee claimants, temporary foreign workers, and other temporary residents, and doesn't include undocumented. So that number is much higher, in fact. The motto of the City of Toronto is diversity is our strength, and that's very much demonstrated in the approach of the City Council, and I'll speak more about that in just a second. I'll now move to the next slide. This slide is about the Newcomer Office. The Newcomer Office was established in 2013, and we are funded at most part by the IRCC and as the citywide LIP. We are part of the municipality, and we work very closely with our colleagues in the 4 Toronto Quadrant LIPs, which are community-based. That relationship with Quadrant LIPs is extremely important to us, and I believe also that our approach and our work at the City of Toronto is also benefiting our community partners as well, because we are able to work on programs and achieve things that they wouldn't be able, and vice versa. They are able to work on things that we may not be for a variety of reasons. The 5 strategic documents that we are responsible for are the Newcomer Strategy, Integrating Cities Action Plan, Refugee Resettlement Program, Access TO for Undocumented Residents, and the Refugee Capacity Plan. The next slide speaks about the some opportunities that are available to us as a LIP that's based within a municipality. They primarily relate to addressing systemic racism, xenophobia, and discrimination. We are very fortunate that we have direct access to many city departments that are working on issues related to immigration and newcomers. And we were able to provide a direct input into the development, for example, of the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism, and directly influenced in a way the formation of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit at the City of Toronto. We work very closely with our colleagues there. We also work very closely with the Indigenous Affairs Office, the Poverty Reduction Strategy Office, and many other city units that are serving newcomers or dealing with issues related to newcomers and immigration. We are also able to leverage the support of the City Council, which is very strong to our work. The City Council championed many of the anti-racism initiatives, such as the one that I shared at the start of my presentation. And you may have not recognized that two of the people that took part in that video are city councillors, Councillor Wong Tam and Councillor Lai, and a few other people are well-known public figures. We are also able to utilize other city resources, including to participate and engage in numerous tables and committees, organize and participate in consultations, public education campaigns, utilize the significant following of the city's social media and of the social media of the Newcomer Office, and to take advantage of the media coverage and participate and provide input into cities' press releases and provide advice to the city on how to respond to questions and deal with issues. The next two slides show posters from some of the public education campaigns that are part of the Toronto for All project, and the Newcomer Office participated in 3. This slide shows 2 posters that were part of the first campaign that was developed in 2016 to address Islamophobia that increased during Syrian resettlement that was happening at the time. These posters and a few others have been displayed in many public places, including public libraries, community centers, recreation centers, community agencies, transit shelters across the city. This next slide, which I'm not, is the first poster on the left-hand side is from the campaign related to anti-Black racism. The second in the middle is about campaign related to homeless people. And the third slide is trans youth of color. Yves mentioned about the new eligible activities and those that are related to celebrating diversity. I'm very happy about that, and just wanted to mention that these events where we celebrate the contributions and acknowledge the contributions of newcomers and welcome newcomers are also very important activities that address discrimination and anti-racism. The Newcomer Day was established in 2015, and since then, in the 5 years where we were able to have an in-person event, more than 35,000 people attended, participated directly. It became a significant community building event. More than 80 community partners directly participate. More than 20 city divisions, a significant business community also participates, and many other institutional and governmental partners as well. Significant media attention is also achieved every year. And for example, in 2019, social media was very engaged, and we had more than 300,000 tweets that day. This is a photo from Nathan Phillips Square, which many of you may recognize. I wanted to conclude and say that 2020 has been a life-changing year for all of us, I would say. The global events that happened have been historic and will be remembered for generations to come. unfortunately, COVID-19 has also further deepened the structural systemic inequities related to racism and other forms of discrimination. And LIPs do not work in isolation. Although we have work plans and funding agreements that span a period of couple of years, of a few years, we need to be able to be responsive and to adjust to the circumstances that are happening at the time that we actually are implementing our work plans. And how exactly our work will look like will be shaped by these events, by what's happening in the moment, but also what's on the context, our local context and our local circumstances. And each LIP will need to develop our own solutions locally. And I hope that what I shared will also help you do that. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Vera, thank you. You know, what I took away from your segment of the presentation is, you know, the powerful communications creative, and I appreciate that you brought that today to share with all of us. I know that many of us have a lot of these sharing opportunities on Basecamp, and it spurs a lot of conversation and discussion and appreciation, and great that we can have that same sharing opportunity in a forum like this, where we can dig into some of the background, some of the context, and some of the characteristics of the LIP in which you are working. We are at about 12 noon now. We have about 15 minutes left. We're going to move now into questions and answers. Specifically, we have one prepared question. Perhaps I'd like to throw this question to each, Olivia and to Vera. And the question is this: our diversity dialogue as a society appears to be shifting towards a stronger focus on specific marginalized populations, Blacks, Indigenous, immigrants, for example, as well as the long-standing barriers that they face: racism, discrimination, inequity. It seems like we're speaking less about diversity, inclusion, and welcoming communities. Instead, these dialogues are now shifting to speak in more stronger terms about anti-oppression, systemic racism. I'm wondering, do you agree? Are you noticing this shift as well in language and focus? And if so, how is this influencing the conversations you're having within your own organizations and with your stakeholders? So I'll ask Olivia to respond first, followed by Vera.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks very much for that question, Rodel. And I think it's a really timely one in the context of what's happening both at a global stage as well as locally in our communities. And absolutely. I mean, I think, just broadly saying, yes, I think we have seen that shift in the language and the conversations and the appetite for dialogue at our LIP tables and at our working group levels as well, and then emerging from the community too. I think as LIPs, we work across diverse sectors in our partnership and coalition building efforts. And I think when I think kind of to historically the work that the North Shore LIP has done in a relatively small community, when I, align our work alongside, work being led by Vera's team out of the municipal Toronto Newcomers Office and the Quadrant LIPs there as well. So very different contexts that we're working in. But I think in large part, our work has mostly been oriented around sharing information around changing community demographics and needs, gathering data around that, sharing that out with service providers, our partners at the tables, rallying around education and public education campaigns, and then supporting LIP partners and service providers to adjust their planning, coordination, and delivery of services in response to that information and the changing demographics and needs, in order to enhance immigrants' prospects for settling and integrating into our community spaces and building capacity to welcome them in more inclusive and holistic ways. And I think, I spoke in my presentation to recognizing different levels of readiness and different levels of different commitments, I guess, if you will, in terms of engagement around these conversations and these topics. And I think, while there's real value and importance in doing kind of the more, certainly from my perspective, the more historical work that NCIP has led as a planning table in a relatively small community, I think there's also a real potential for introducing more nuanced elements to our work, right? And an opportunity to look at kind of how the institutions and sectors that are represented at our table, looking at some of the underlying structures and systems that infuse these sectors. So, and I think about some of the frameworks around like structures of oppression, right? And frameworks of oppression like racism, colonialism, gender oppression, patriarchy. And I think there's an opportunity for LIPS to ask ourselves about new and emerging opportunities to engage these systems to support more holistic experiences of immigrant settlement and inclusion as well. And I think just one other thing to add is I think these pivots in conversation and the framing of our work has been informed by changes in a broader provincial context as well. So certainly in BC, we're starting to see more funding being allocated directly towards addressing systemic racism in our communities, and opportunities to apply anti-oppression frameworks in designing community service responses. And a good example of this in BC, I'll reference the recently launched Resilience BC Network, which is a provincial anti-racism network created to support communities to address racism and anti-hate crimes and hate incidences through a hub and spoke model. And so in the context of our LIP work, this past summer, NSMS, so our host agency, was awarded the Resilience BC Community Spoke contract for the North Shore region. And so with this, many NCIP partners now are involved as we come together and start formulating an action plan in the work going forward through that funding, to look at deepening community understandings around experiences of racism and hate crimes in our communities and developing some more coordinated responses. So I think there's lots of opportunities, and certainly as a North Shore LIP, we're seeing that shift in desire to deepen the conversations, but I think the engagement at multiple levels is still really important, at least within our community where there's a huge spectrum of readiness to engage in dialogue around this work.
All right, thank you for that, Olivia. Vera, jump in here. Has the language changed at your particular LIP tables regarding, diversity and inclusion to a greater focus on anti-oppression, systemic racism?
Thank you, Rodel. I'll try to be brief because I'm aware of time. That is very much true. But I also wanted to say that it has also been true in the past that conversations shift and change when we are faced with significant events and crisis situations. I remember September 11th, and the events right after, and the rising in Islamophobia. I remember also the tsunami, for example, and significant ecological disasters, and these are times when more clarity is where issues become more clear, and it's in fact opportune time for us to take the advantage of the attention to the issues and work to address them so that we as a society can move forward and become a more just society, as I believe Yves mentioned in his presentation. So yes, the city and our partners have engaged in deeper conversations the way you described them, and many of our partners have, for example, issued statements related to anti-Black racism earlier this year and are doing a lot of work focused on anti-racism.
Right. Thank you for that, Vera. I'd like to move to one of the questions, and perhaps the most popular one that we see on Slido is directed to Yves. The question was asked in English. Yves, sometimes it is unclear where our work moves into advocacy, which we are told by IRCC. Actually, I think that question just came off of my screen. Let me just get it back here. Sometimes it's unclear where our work moves into advocacy, which we are told by IRCC is not within our mandate. Can you clarify with respect to anti-racism work?
Thank you so much, Rodel. So that's a great question. So that's correct. Advocacy is not an eligible activity. We've been clear, I think, in our, I guess, contribution agreement clauses that advocacy is not an eligible activity for LIPS and RIF. But definitely all the LIPS and all the RIFs should be speaking and talking about racism and talking about the research around racism. So it's absolutely okay to have this as a theme for our community dialogues, because this is exactly what Vera and Olivia were talking about, of ensuring that we have this intersections, this dialogue with newcomers, racialized newcomers. So definitely you can apply this lens, but dialogue, yes, but advocacy, no.
Okay. Thank you, Yves. We have a question here that was posed in French, and it is actually directed to Vera. And I'll read out the English translation. What are the impacts of the Toronto for All campaign? Has the campaign been translated into French? Have Francophone organizations been approached?
I can respond as far as the three campaigns that I have been directly involved in, or that the Newcomer Office has been directly involved in. We did translate the materials into other languages, and French is one of the languages that we always translate our materials into. I would say that the impact has been significant and at a couple of levels. One level is that it created, it opened space, or they opened space for conversations, and community partners and community members have engaged in these conversations with us, sometimes on social media, but oftentimes not as directly, not as publicly. So we had meetings and consultations that were part of these public-facing campaigns, and the creative side of the campaigns also helped with that engagement. And I would say that they were successful.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Just received a message that we can continue for another 10 minutes past our allotted time. So I'm going to continue on with some of the questions. And the next upvoted question is for Yves. And the question was posed in English, and it's about the ZIPs. The Zonal Immigration Partnership classification is new to us. Can IRCC explain a bit more about ZIPs and what the activity/funding implications might be?
Thank you, Rodel. That's a great question again. So the Zonal Immigration Partnership, this is a new concept. And just to go back to the evolution of LIPS and RIF, like the LIPS and RIF have evolved initially over the concept of aligning with bigger cities or medium-sized cities. And in some cases, there was kind of an evolution of catching larger areas. But over time, it became obvious, I guess, for IRCC that maybe we needed to adapt the model a little bit to rural settings, remote settings, and especially as Canada is embracing more and more the notion that smaller cities, rural settings, rural areas should welcome newcomers, should welcome immigrants, and they'll be part of the selections, attraction strategy from now on, as you heard about the Municipal Nominee Program, the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot, the Atlantic Immigration Pilots. All these models are speaking to the fact that we need immigrants outside MTV, outside Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. And the ZIP are part of the kind of this new modeling. So yes, we're testing a new model, and there are already several LIPS and RIF that evolve over CMAs. So that's great. And also over medium-sized centers. So yes, because LIPs were moving naturally to more rural areas, it was nice to consider a new model. And the ZIPs is just testing a new model of change. So how can we ensure that those smaller areas, which would have not necessarily met the criteria for a LIP because they don't have sufficient newcomers or they don't have a sufficient settlement supports or engagement with the newcomer population, would still meet this ideal of embracing a welcoming community. So ZIP is basically testing the model at a smaller scale in different areas. So yes, it's still pilot, it's still a feasibility, and we'll learn from it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Yves. There are two questions. They are directed to Olivia, and it's based on your presentation, Olivia. The questions read like this, and perhaps I'll give you both, and you can sort of round out your response to address both. Would be great to hear more from Olivia regarding the positioning of statements, and in parentheses they have settlement agency versus LIPs. The second question is, could you elaborate on community design teams and how are they different from traditional working groups or committees?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Rodel. I mean, those are both really great questions. I think, and I think back to Yves' response to that question around dialogue and not advocacy with regards to letters and statements and positioning of that. And so we've had lots of conversations at our LIP table, at the NSIP table, around level of appropriateness and comfort around issuing, for example, a LIP statement, around anti-racism statement, or decrying kind of or calling out, naming the increase in specifically in the early spring anti-Asian hate crimes and racist incidences on the North Shore, exacerbated absolutely by COVID-19. And ultimately, as a table, we decided that we weren't going to issue a common NSIP statement, and rather that individual partners from within the LIP would issue their own individual statements, as then did North Shore Multicultural Society as the host agency for the LIP. But we decided as a planning table not to issue one common statement. And I think that's part of kind of us grappling with our understanding around what is that blurry line around making statements. Does that fall into an advocacy sphere? Is that more dialogue and information sharing? We're still figuring that out, and it's certainly helpful to hear some clarity from IRCC around that and how that's viewed within the context of LIPs. The community design team approach, again, it's connected to like some of the deep thinking we've done as a partnership table around our theory of change model and what it means for us as a LIP to intentionally be centering Indigenous, and racialized voices in the work we lead in community. And so when we look kind of historically at the North Shore and we look at some of the structures in place on the North Shore within the sectors we work, the reality is that our LIP partnership table is predominantly a table made up of non-racialized individuals. And so our table, and that is similar, though there's some differences at the working group level. So we do have 4 working groups connected with our 4 strategic priorities as an NSIP table. But emerging, like a lot of the community design teams are connected to our community connections and intercultural relations working group. But within that group, there's been conversations around missing voices, right? And so the community design teams have involve members of that one particular working group, but we've been really intentional about saying there are voices that aren't here and need to be part of this design team as we look at doing projects around building understanding around racism in our community, experienced by racialized migrants, experienced by Indigenous community members, etc. We don't want to do the work without centering those voices. So that's where the community design team kind of model has evolved. It's been really to provide an opportunity to create a new space for centering different voices in our work going forward.
Right. Thank you for that. I had also picked up on, the term community design in your particular presentation, so I'm pleased that someone picked up on it as well in the questions. We have a question that I think is best posed to Vera, and the question goes like this. How do you get buy-in as a LIP located within a municipality from council? What is the LIP role to advise council on newcomer matters?
That's a great question, and I'm very happy to say that it's almost easy at the City of Toronto to do that. The council is very interested in immigration issues and is very much appreciative, I would say, that there is a newcomer office that they can turn to. We have become a go-to place for many people, including city councilors, and they reach out to us very often. I think our name also is helping in that regard, because we don't call ourselves a citywide LIP. We call ourselves the Toronto Newcomer Office. So I'm not certain that all city councillors even realize that we are funded at most part by IRCC and that we are a LIP. I also I mentioned that the City Council has very progressive views, that they declared Toronto a sanctuary city, which speaks to their position about immigration issues. I also wanted to mention that because of the size of the newcomer community and the issues that this community is facing in Toronto, it is important for City Council to pay attention and to be responsive. So I think the fact that we are part of the municipality works in great favor and is really helpful in Toronto.
Right, thank you for that. We have a question here that I think I can delegate to each of you. Some community anti-racism campaigns have called for police reform. How can we negotiate such demands as LIPs, considering our relationship with municipalities? Not the easiest of questions, I acknowledge.
Perhaps I can start again.
Absolutely.
I think because we are part of the municipality, we have an opportunity to talk directly and outside of a public conversations, public domains, to talk directly to City Council and to senior city staff, and in that regard it's a bit easier. But the City of Toronto has a couple of months ago, in late August, in fact, established a policing reforms unit. And we are already within our city, outside of the municipal structure, there are conversations about that, and the municipal structure is coordinating, leading these conversations, and consulting with our partners and residents. And I was happy and very supportive when one of my staff at the Newcomer Office was approached and offered to be part of that policing reforms team, because then we can influence things as well and incorporate a newcomer lens in that work too.
Okay. Olivia, I don't know if you work with policing stakeholders, in North Shore. Anything that you'd like to add on this?
Yeah, thanks, Rodel. I mean, I think it's a really challenging question. And I know we work very closely with both the North Van RCMP, which serves City of North Van and District of North Van, and the West Van Police Department. And I think, one of the things that I think is a really interesting opportunity right now is through this Resilience BC funding that NSMS has received, and where we're leveraging partnerships through the NSIP table. There's an opportunity really to work alongside the RCMP and the police departments to look at developing, co-creating and co-developing a community response protocol to anti-racist incidents and anti-hate crimes, you know, I think as a community, you know, there's still a lot of kind of reconciling, if you will, of the role of police and RCMP on the North Shore in communities, and we're certainly having a lot of conversations around, you know, different entry points for working with the police department in West Van and the North Van RCMP too. But, you know, at this stage, I would say that, you know, we're still very much kind of scoping where are there opportunities. And it's a great question. I think it's really challenging and one we're grappling with right now as a small community. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Yves, same sort of question. I know that, you know, this is challenging from an IRCC perspective because you resource LIPs and RIFs, and we are the ones who are sort of in the conversation with community stakeholders around these types of issues. And what I see from Slido is that there are some additional questions wanting to know, you know, where's that line where, you know, advocacy begins and where LIPs and RIFs, you know, sort of stop. Perhaps you have some comments on the original question. Since some community anti-racism campaigns have called for police reform, how can we negotiate such demands as LIPs?
Yeah, so as Olivia and Vera explained eloquently, I think by design, we expect that most LIPs have dialogues with police forces. Many police forces at their table. They're part of the council. They're part of the discussion. So to the extent that that the municipality is not the only interlocutor of LIPs, to the extent that the council is broad enough to have those voices from community groups to police forces to municipality, I guess this is where I guess the kind of initial dialogue should first take place of what is the sweet spot for engaging on such delicate matters.
Okay, thank you, Yves. And with that, we have reached the end of time for this particular session. I'd like to thank Yves, Olivia, and Vera for your participation and your collaboration on this plenary session. Thank you very much. One of the things that I am left with as a result of this session are some of the words that Vera had shared with us. LIPs and RIFs don't work in isolation, and that we are constantly responding to the moment. And, you know, we are each trying to respond in ways that are commensurate with the priority that these subjects have in our respective communities, while also being mindful of, you know, what is our role as LIPs and RIFs in the general context of creating welcoming communities. I encourage all of you to network and to visit the exhibitions that are available virtually. And it looks like you have about 33 minutes or so until the top of the hour when the first set of breakout sessions begin. To all of you, thank you. And to all the panelists, I appreciate the time and contribution and expertise you've shared with us. So with that, we're going to close this session. Thank you all.